He hadn't planned to stop, let alone spend $3. But the woman in chains wasn't what she seemed, and when she whispered a fragmented name, Voss, the past he buried clawed its way back. What started as a flicker of pity threatened to ignite a reckoning. Some ghosts refused to remain interred. The bidding commenced at $2, a sum barely audible above the dry, rasping wind. The trading post was a ramshackle structure, its sun-bleached planks groaning under the weight of neglect and history. Yet today it pulsed with life, mostly male, mostly hardened, drawn by the promise of livestock, firearms, and this spectacle. She was hauled into the light, a chain cinching her ankles, wrists bound before her, her face obscured by a cascade of dark, unkempt hair. Dust clung to her like a second skin, a visible manifestation of her humiliation. No one uttered her given name, only the girl. Her age remained unstated, her alleged transgression unacknowledged, merely shackles and the damning label, unclaimed property. The initial bidder possessed a voice that sounded like stones grinding together and a visage etched with the cruelty of countless seasons. No one displayed surprise. Billings, the trading post's proprietor, a man whose smile held the predatory glint of a butcher and whose eyes calculated like a clerk's, leaned against the rail, a predatory grin playing on his lips. $2 going once, he droned, his voice laced with bored amusement. Surely she's worth more than a bag of rusty nails? A few coarse chuckles rippled through the crowd. Another voice countered, $2.50. Then a third, flat and decisive, slicing through the air like a honed blade. $3. The voice belonged to Jonah Voss, though the words had escaped his lips before his mind could register the intent. He'd only sought salt and fresh tack, a brief detour from the trail that had consumed him for weeks. His coat bore the crimson dust of the Pecos, and his boots hadn't yet shed the day's heat. He cared little for crowds, and even less for the company of others. But something about her, the unyielding set of her jaw, the absence of trembling in her shoulders despite the men's jeers and lewd gazes, stirred within him a long-dormant sensation, injustice. Billings squinted, regarding him with a newfound interest. $3. Going once, going twice, sold to the gentleman. You got the silver, stranger? Jonah remained silent, moving forward with a purpose that belied his earlier apathy. He reached into his coat, producing the coins. 3 silver dollars, dulled by travel and time. Billings accepted them with a shrug. She's all yours, one less headache for me. The girl finally lifted her head as Jonah reached for the chain. The iron had chafed her wrists raw, and her breath caught in her throat as his fingers brushed against the lock. He uttered no words, simply released it slowly, gingerly, as if fearing to inflict further damage upon something already broken. As the shackles clattered against the hard-packed dirt, a hush fell over the assembled men. The girl remained motionless, paralyzed by an invisible force. Jonah finally allowed himself a glance at her face. Young, but not as fragile as he initially assumed. Late 20s, perhaps. Dirt streaked her cheeks, yet the lines of her jaw spoke of an inherent resilience. Her eyes, when they met his, held a depth of darkness, not fear, but a cautious appraisal. Cold embers, not spent ash. "What's your name?" he inquired softly. She scanned the surroundings, then leaned closer. Her voice cracked, a dry whisper. "Kayla." He waited expectantly. She swallowed, as if forcing the words past an obstruction. "Kalivas Voss." The name struck him with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. Not because it was a casual acquaintance, but because it was intrinsically his. His surname, uncommon, undeniably his. Voss. Behind him, a crude joke echoed. "Looks like he bought himself some kin," someone chortled, oblivious to the fact that Jonah had frozen, his body rigid. Kayla offered no smile, only fixed him with a gaze that challenged him to either flee or confront the truth. He grasped her elbow, guiding her with a firm but gentle hand, leading her towards his horse, tethered at the edge of the dusty yard. The crowd murmured, watched, but refrained from intervention. Few dared cross a man who moved with Jonah Voss's lethal grace. He hoisted her onto the saddle with a surprising gentleness, then mounted behind her. They departed without exchanging a single word. Only after they had traversed 2 miles of the unforgiving landscape did Jonah finally break the silence. "Where did you come by that name?" Kayla remained rigid, her back ramrod straight. But her voice, when it came, was steady. "My mother gave it to me, and your father never knew you, never saw you, but knew your name. Jonah Voss, a drifter, vanished before I drew my first breath." His hands tightened on the reins, the knuckles white. The trail blurred before his eyes. Kayla sensed the turmoil within him. "Is that you?" Jonah offered no response, unsure which answer would inflict the most pain. The shack that served as her refuge that night was meager. A single room, a cot, a stove. Jonah had vowed never to bring anyone to this desolate place. He had eschewed conversation for 3 long years, confining his interactions to essential supply runs. But she lay sleeping, if it could be termed such, huddled in a corner, a blanket clutched tightly, and a stolen knife concealed beneath her arm. Mutual distrust permeated the small space, but both desperately craved something. For the moment, perhaps, that shared need would suffice. He sat vigil by the stove, watching the flames dance and writhe within the iron belly. The name echoed incessantly in his mind. Calavas, his name. 12 years prior, he had abandoned a woman in Kansas who had pleaded with him to stay. He had refused to look back. Some men fled from the law. Jonah had fled from himself, and now she stood before him, not a spectral apparition, but something frighteningly close. He drifted into a fitful sleep, his boots still laced, haunted by visions of red earth and a woman weeping, her voice a discordant blend of fury and longing. He awoke before the dawn's first light. The blanket where Kayla had sought rest lay empty. The knife had vanished along with her. He stepped into the cold, gray dawn. Her tracks were etched clearly in the dirt, heading north, moving swiftly. He saddled his horse with practiced speed. For a mile, the trail remained distinct. Then, it dissolved. He paused at a bend, a chilling realization washing over him. Hoofprints. 4 of them, fresh, distinct, leading into the treacherous canyons. Jonah's stomach churned. Her captors had wasted no time. He followed, his resolve hardening with each stride. The second sign of struggle was even more ominous. A fragment of her scarf snagged on a thorny branch, stained with crimson at the edge. A small amount, yet enough. Enough to amplify the feeling that the past sought retribution for every mile he had attempted to escape. The tracks plunged into the red canyons like bloodlines tracing back to ancient wounds, narrow, winding, and carved by forces indifferent to the cost of passage. Jonah pressed onward, unyielding. His horse struggled against the steep incline, its hooves slipping on the loose shale. But Jonah's jaw remained set like granite, his gaze sweeping the trail with a ferocious intensity, as if he could conjure the truth from the very dust. At the canyon's fork, the hoofprints veered sharply into a gulch, barely wide enough for a wagon's passage. Jonah followed without hesitation. He did not pause to question his motives. He did not contemplate the extent of his obligation to this woman, nor did he dwell on the veracity of her claim. She had been taken, and something primal stirred within him. An ancient rage, a long dormant fury. A mile into the gulch, he discovered the first unmistakable sign. A broken branch, recently snapped, followed by a heel drag in the dirt. Someone had stumbled unwillingly, then a dark smear against the sandstone. Jonah dismounted, crouching low, touching it with 2 fingers. Still wet. She was still alive. He pressed on, moving with a stealth honed by years of solitude. The canyon widened into a desolate basin, scattered with scrub brush and the bleached bones of long-dead trees. Near the edge, downwind, a campfire smoldered. Jonah dismounted, leaving his horse's reins loose, and approached on foot. He didn't need to draw closer to discern their presence. 3 men, 2 standing guard, 1 squatting beside something, or someone. Kayla. Her arms were bound once more, this time with coarse rope. One of the men knelt beside her, prodding her with the butt of his rifle, treating her as if she were a trapped animal. She offered no resistance, no pleas, merely stared ahead, her spirit seemingly detached from her broken body. Jonah felt his hand instinctively move towards the Colt he hadn't drawn in months. He waited, controlling his breathing, assessing their movements. The pacing man, gaunt and fidgety, clutched a revolver, but his movements betrayed his unfamiliarity with its use. The squatting man was more dangerous, his smile suggesting a perverse enjoyment. The third remained silent, older, likely the leader. He stood with a rifle slung casually over his shoulder, observing the others without participating in their cruelty. Jonah recognized the type, the orchestrator, not the direct perpetrator. He stepped from behind the rocks, his voice cutting through the stillness. "Morning." All three heads snapped up, their expressions a mixture of surprise and hostility. Kayla's eyes widened with a flicker of something akin to hope. The older man turned fully, his gaze narrowing as he evaluated Jonah. "You lost, friend?" Jonah's hand remained near his weapon, but not touching it, not yet. "You're with her?" the pacing man demanded, his voice cracking with forced bravado. "I paid for her," Jonah replied, his tone devoid of emotion. Though the words tasted like ash in his mouth, he allowed them to hang in the air. $3 even. That makes her mine, doesn't it? The squatting man spat on the ground. "You should have offered 4. Maybe then she'd be worth something." Jonah's face remained impassive. "You have 3 seconds to untie her." The camp fell silent, the air thick with tension. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The leader tilted his head, his eyes glinting with a dangerous intelligence. "You threatening us?" "Not yet." "What's your name, cowboy?" "Voss." Something flickered in the older man's eyes. He stepped back slowly, as if he had inadvertently touched a burning stove. "Voss," he repeated, his voice tinged with a newfound respect or perhaps fear. Jonah remained unflinching. "Yeah, Jonah Voss." Behind him, Kayla stirred, the ropes around her wrists tightening with her involuntary movement. The leader's hand moved towards his rifle, the motion smooth and deliberate. But Jonah was already in motion. His Colt roared once, the sound echoing through the canyon. The leader staggered backward, a crimson stain blossoming across his chest. The squatting man scrambled for cover. The twitchy one screamed, firing wildly, his shots missing their target. Jonah dropped him with a second shot, then turned his attention to the third. But the leader was already gone, swallowed by the labyrinthine rocks. Cowardice or pragmatism, it no longer mattered. Jonah rushed to Kayla's side. Her hands were raw and bleeding, her lips split, but she still lived. He knelt, swiftly cutting through the ropes with his knife, catching her as she slumped against him. "You came back," she whispered, her voice hoarse with pain and disbelief. "I shouldn't have let you go." "I didn't go willingly, I ran." "I know." No further words were exchanged. Not yet, there was no time. Jonah hoisted her onto his horse, then mounted behind her. He glanced once at the fallen men, their bodies still and lifeless. He despised the weight of their deaths, hated the ease with which he had reverted to his former self. But the blood had already dried on his palms as they rode away from the canyon. They rode for hours, their silence unbroken. Kayla leaned against him, shivering despite the sun's warmth. Her silence was not born of fear, but of exhaustion. Jonah shared her weariness. When they reached the shack, he did not offer to carry her inside. She walked on her own, her shoulders squared with defiance. She claimed the cot without prompting. That night, Jonah built a fire that needed no building, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames. "Are you going to ask me?" she finally asked from the cot. "Ask what?" "If it's true." He remained facing the fire. "I already know." She sat up slowly, rubbing her abused wrists. "You abandoned her, my mother." "I did." "She said you possessed a kind heart once." "I did." "What changed?" Jonah drew a long breath. "She became pregnant. I became consumed by fear. I convinced myself I couldn't fulfill the role of father, that I was inherently unfit, so I left. I told myself it was the right course, that she'd be better off without me." Kayla watched him, her expression unreadable in the firelight. "You were wrong." "I know." Silence settled between them once more. "You owe me nothing," she said after a considerable pause. "I owe you everything," Jonah countered, turning to face her. She was no longer a girl, but a woman forged in the crucible of suffering, her spirit shaped by a pain he had unwittingly inflicted. But there existed a core of steel within her, and something that hinted at grace. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close enough to inflict its own kind of ache. Jonah rose and stepped outside. The night air carried a sharp bite, but he welcomed the sting. Then, he saw it. Smoke, not emanating from his chimney, but rising from the south ridge. He whirled around, scanning the horizon. A second plume, then a third. Signal fires, or something far more sinister. Kayla stepped beside him. "You see them too?" He nodded grimly. "Someone's coming." Not someone many. An instinctive certainty settled upon him, a chilling premonition. The sensation crawled across his skin, a relic of his war-torn past. Just before the ambush, just before the earth opened up to swallow them whole. "We have to leave," Kayla insisted, already turning towards the shack. Jonah caught her arm. "You can't keep running." "I'm not running. I'm preparing." And in that instant he understood. She was no longer paralyzed by fear. She had endured enough. Now she would fight. But the overriding question wasn't who approached, but why. What motive had driven 3 strangers to abduct Kayla from the open trail? What was the meaning of that man's reaction upon hearing the name Voss? And who had lit the distant signal fires, and why? Now something was set to happen, something Jonah hadn't buried deep enough. By the time the sun crested the ridgeline, the smoke had dissipated, leaving only traces of ash drifting skyward, quickly dispersed by the wind. But the message had been delivered with the clarity of gunfire. Whoever had ignited those plumes desired to be seen, desired to instill within Jonah and Kayla the knowledge that they were no longer alone. Trouble was approaching, not with a sudden surge, but with an inexorable creep, like water seeping through decaying timbers. The kind of danger that possessed the patience to wait, confident in their inevitable confrontation. Jonah devoted the early morning to surveying the land surrounding the shack. 10 deliberate circuits, his boots crunching on frost-covered weeds, his eyes scanning for telltale signs. As of yet, nothing. Kayla worked inside, silently brewing coffee, gathering their meager supplies. She offered no questions regarding their destination. She simply packed like a woman familiar with forced departures. But they remained in place. Not yet. Jonah harbored one final task before they vanished. He offered no explanation to Kayla. He saddled his horse and rode out, armed only with his rifle and a coil of rope. She didn't attempt to dissuade him, didn't demand explanations. She simply stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her hair tossed by the wind, watching him ride away, as if she possessed the knowledge that he would never return unchanged. He rode southeast towards the trading post. It bore a markedly different character today, quieter, more desolate. A handful of horses stood tethered outside. A wagon with a broken wheel leaned forlornly against the fence. A drunk slumped on the porch, a bottle clutched against his ribs like a comforting presence. Inside, the stale stench of tobacco and decay permeated the air. Jonah pushed through the door without hesitation. Billings stood behind the counter, meticulously counting his coins. He glanced up, blinked once, and offered no greeting. "Didn't expect to see you again." Jonah remained silent, moving to the counter, placing both hands on the worn wood and fixing Billings with an unwavering stare. Billings cleared his throat. "If you're here regarding the girl I informed you, she ceased to be my concern upon payment." "You knew who she was," Jonah stated softly. A flicker of something, almost imperceptible, registered in Billings' eyes. "I didn't know her name, but you knew who she was." She arrived shackled. The freight sheriff deposited her with no name, no list of charges, said he'd return. He never did. She languished out back for nearly a week before I considered finding someone to take her off my hands. "You asked no questions." Billings scoffed. "Do you mistake this establishment for a courthouse?" Jonah leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Who was the sheriff?" A moment of hesitation, then, "Mallory, from Sundown County." A knot formed in Jonah's stomach. He knew the Mallory family. Years ago, he had ridden with them, fought alongside them, placed his trust in them before he comprehended the perversion of justice they espoused. The kind that favored the wealthy and powerful, that protected landowners while actively persecuting the landless. They termed it justice. Jonah had chosen a different word. That was the journey that had irrevocably broken him, the journey that had caused him to disappear, and now they were closing in once more. He turned to depart. "Wait," Billings urged hastily. "Will you bring her back?" Jonah paused in the doorway. "She's not a horse, Billings." "No, but someone is coming. Men inquired about her yesterday, claiming she had fled, claiming she belonged to them." Jonah turned, his gaze icy. "She belongs to no one." Then he was gone. He didn't ride quickly but hard. Time stretched into an indistinguishable blur. His jaw ached with tension. The sun climbed in the sky but offered no warmth. Each hoofbeat hammered like a drumbeat calling him to war. Upon reaching the shack, he found Kayla waiting, a rifle in her hands, packed bags at her feet. She did not inquire about his discoveries. She simply asked, "They are close, aren't they?" He nodded. Kayla glanced at the sky. "Then we shouldn't be here when they arrive." But Jonah shook his head. "We will be." Her eyes narrowed. "You intend to confront them?" "I had hoped we could simply end this." Kayla scrutinized him. "They will come with overwhelming force, 12 men or more. We would better be smart, make a plan." Jonah met her gaze. "Because if we flee, we will forever run. You will never stop looking over your shoulder, and neither will I." Kayla seemed poised to argue, but remained silent. She simply turned and walked inside. That night, they prepared their defenses. Jonah reinforced the windows, scattered broken bottles beneath the eaves, readied a series of old traps he had long forgotten. Kayla boiled water, counted bullets, sharpened blades dulled by neglect. Neither sought sleep. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows that seemed to morph into ghosts upon the walls. At some point, Kayla sat across from him. "Do you truly believe you are my father?" "I don't know what I believe. My mother said you vanished before I could even speak, that she wrote letters that remained unanswered." Jonah's throat felt raw. "I didn't deserve them. She used to sit on the porch at dusk, hoping that one day you would come back. I didn't. She died when I was 14 years old from a fever. I buried her myself." Jonah closed his eyes. "I hated you," she said. "For a long time. I don't blame you. But now, I am not sure. Maybe I wanted to mean something, anything." Jonah nodded. "Me too." Before either could speak again, the dogs began to bark, not their own, but the wild ones that haunted the canyons, whose howls served as an omen of impending doom. Kayla rose to her feet. Jonah already clutched his rifle. They stepped outside and saw the torches. Down by the creek, a line of flickering lights moved slowly towards them. Riders, at least 10, perhaps more. Leading the way was a wagon, tall, black, boxy. Jonah's blood turned to ice. He recognized that wagon. It belonged to Sheriff Clayton Mallory himself. They did not speak, only watched. The riders halted at the edge of the property, waiting. Then a solitary figure advanced, slow and deliberate. Kayla gasped. Jonah already knew. Sheriff Mallory dismounted with a deceptive grace, his coat trimmed with silver, his boots impeccably polished. His gun hung low, a symbol of his power. He raised a hand in what might have been a greeting. "Jonah Voss, it has been a long time." Jonah remained unmoved. "I never anticipated seeing you again. You possess something that belongs to me. She belongs to no one." Mallory's smile revealed too many teeth. "Do you remain righteous, Voss, after all these years?" "I was never righteous, merely weary of being wrong." Mallory nodded slowly. "Then surrender her to me." "No." The smile vanished. "You don't wish to contend with me, Jonah." "Not for myself," Jonah said, stepping forward. "But I will burn this place to the ground before I permit you to take her." Mallory studied him, then turned to Kayla. He whistled. 2 men dragged something from the wagon, dumping it unceremoniously in the dirt. It was a man, barely alive, bloodied, one eye swollen shut. Kayla screamed. Jonah surged forward, but Mallory drew his gun. "I would advise against that," he said calmly. "Unless you wish to witness the remainder of him die." Kayla sank to her knees beside the man, her hands trembling as she touched his face. Levi. Jonah froze. He knew that name. Kayla looked up, her eyes ablaze with fury. My brother. Mallory's smile returned. We found him snooping through our records. He claimed he was seeking a name, said he had questions. Jonah clenched his fists. Mallory holstered his weapon. I grant you until dawn. Then he turned and walked away, leaving the night heavy with dread. Kayla cradled her brother's hand, as if it was the sole anchor keeping her tethered to this world. Jonah remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the fire. Deep within, something shifted, a profound alteration. He had believed this was about recompense. He hadn't realized it was about war. They labored in silence through the frigid hours that followed. No one spoke of dawn, no one uttered the word surrender. Jonah tore cloth into bandages while Kayla cleansed her brother's wounds with water so icy it made her hands ache. Levi drifted in and out of awareness, too far gone to articulate words, but his eyes flickered open with enough frequency to sustain hope. He was young, younger than Kayla by a few years, and their resemblance was unmistakable. The same strong cheekbones, the same resolute chin, and as she wiped the blood from his temple, Jonah saw something else within his face, a subtle reflection of the woman he had abandoned in Kansas. Jonah retreated to give her space. The wind now carried a piercing bite, a reminder that soon there will be blood. The fire Mallory's men had ignited by the creek still smoldered in the distance, casting a sickly yellow glow. A stark reminder they would return and to not even think about running. Jonah patrolled the perimeter once more, meticulously checking every trap. They fortified the shack, turning it into a refuge that could withstand an assault, but not an indefinite siege. He counted the remaining ammunition twice. He knew the numbers were against them. Back inside, Kayla remained steadfastly at Levi's side. She looked up as Jonah entered. Her eyes were fatigued. Do you believe they will wait for sunrise? I believe they will wait for us to believe that they will. She tightened her jaw. Then we do the same. Jonah walked to the table and poured coffee from the kettle and handed one to Kayla. Her fingers were trembling when she grasped it. Tell me about him, Jonah said in a low tone, glancing over at Levi. Kayla released a breath. Smart, too smart. Reads anything he can get his hands on. He wanted to find out everything about you. Said that I don't care about the past, he does, and he was going to care for both of us. Jonah looked down. I think he wanted to know where he came from. Kayla said we were born with no real father, no map, just stories. He hated not knowing, so he looked and they found him. Jonah closed his eyes. It's my fault. No, she responded quickly. It's Mallory's and the rest of them. It's not yours. Jonah wanted to believe that, but the guilt clung to him like a wet coat that wouldn't come off. Dawn creeped up gray. Jonah watched from the window. Kayla sat close to Levi, who was steady sleeping. Every sound felt like could be the sound of approaching hooves, but nothing came. The rider was just a child. His horse was sweating and his breath made clouds in the cold air. Jonah raised his rifle. The boy stopped. Message, he yelled. Jonah stepped out and the boy handed him a letter. He said, It's a mercy. Jonah opened it. It read, You bring her down the hill before the sun hits noon, or your sins die with her. He looked at the boy. What's your name? Wade, said the boy. I just deliver. You believe in mercy, Wade? Wade blinked. I don't know. Then you're smarter than most. Jonah turned and walked back inside without another word. Kayla was on her feet now. What did it say? He handed her the note. She read it once, then again. They'll kill us. They'll try. We can't fight them all. No, Jonah agreed. But we can give them something to choke on. So after all that dust and heartache, what do we really take away? It's about how the ghosts of our past can come roaring back to life, and sometimes, facing them head on, even when it's terrifying, is the only way to find a sliver of redemption. It's about finding a reason to fight, even when you think you're all out of fight. And maybe, just maybe, it's about finding family in the most unexpected places. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. What resonated with you the most? What questions did it leave you with? Drop a comment below and let's get a conversation going. And if you enjoyed this exploration of redemption, second chances, and the long shadow of the past, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future stories. We've got more journeys to take, more characters to meet, and more worlds to explore together. Thanks for watching.